A group of young radicals appeared at the gates of a tech retreat in Northern California, cloaked in black robes, faces hidden, but intent clear. Disrupt, confront, awaken. They were unknown, uninvited, and unwelcome. But they believed they were right, that the world was sleepwalking toward annihilation, and they were the only ones brave enough to stop it. This wasn't the beginning of a protest. It was the beginning of a movement that would evolve into a cult that would leave a trail of violence, mystery, and death across America. This is the rise and the fall of the Zizians. So sit back, relax, and take a deep breath. It's time to let the fresh air in. Hello, everyone. Welcome back, or welcome if you're new. My name is Erin, and I am fascinated by all things cults, true crime, and unique spiritual practices, and scammers, and all the things in between. So if you're into this sort of thing, please consider subscribing. I would absolutely love to have you here. This situation is blowing my mind and so infuriating to me because A, these people are vegan. So, I don't know. In my brain, you can't really say you're vegan, but want to kill people. It just feels a little like there's some alignment not there. And then also, some of these members identified as transgender. And I just hate when there is a group that is already on the fringes of society, where people are already taking action to try to harm members of that community. And then members of that community give them all a bad name because they decide to do things like what this group did. It drives me crazy. But I assure you, I bet all transgender people across the world, they do not claim these people. And as a vegan, we do not claim them. Although, yes, I know some vegans can be very insufferable. And I say that as a vegan, but we just got to be cooler vegans, guys. We just need to be cooler vegans. Let's not kill humans to start. Okay, maybe we'll start there. But anyways, before we jump into this video, I want to say thank you so much to today's sponsor, Aura. So if you've ever wondered how scammers get your phone number or how spammers find a way to flood your inbox, this is why. There are literally companies called data blockers that sell your data. They do it without your consent, and then they make billions selling it to marketers, scammers, and even stalkers, which is absolutely horrifying. And if you've been following me here for a while, you know that I advocate for safety. So this is why I love partnering with Aura. Now, these companies are legally required to remove your info only if you ask, though. And then they make the process as confusing as they possibly can. So that is why I recommend today's sponsor, Aura, to all of my family and my friends, because they take care of the hard part completely automatically. They totally remove your info from these sites and they keep it off. It is so incredible because I will get notifications from Aura that will notify me, hey, your name or your birthday or your social security number was found online, and we are just automatically going to request that it gets deleted. They do it instantaneously, automatically. It is incredible. It also has a VPN. It also has parental controls. It is just what I always like to call it, full spectrum data protection, whether it's your phone, your tablet, your computer. It's incredible. So, if you already have some digital security tool and you think you feel safe, not having Aura is like thinking you've locked the front door, but then you leave your back door wide open. It's absolutely incredible because it's one of the only platforms that gives you alerts the second they find your personal information on the dark web. There are also real-time fraud alerts for credit and banking and 24/7 monitoring to help keep your identity secure. I mean, whoever's behind this, they literally do not sleep. You've also got antivirus, a password manager, and more. It's US based support that is available around the clock if something goes wrong. And if anything does happen, ARA includes a $5 million identity theft insurance protection program. And they have fraud experts ready to help 24/7. So if you're curious about ARA and want to check it out, you can get 14 days free. That is 2 weeks free when you sign up using my link, ara.com/letthefresharin. That's ara.com/letthefresharin. The link is in my description box down below as well. Thank you guys so much. And thank you so much to ARA for sponsoring this video and being such a wonderful supporter of the channel. So now let's jump on in. The story of the Zizians begins not in a secret compound or far-flung commune, but in the heart of the San Francisco Bay Area's tech and science circles. Jack Amadeus LaSota, later known as Ziz, moved from Alaska to the Bay Area in 2016, drawn by the promise of Silicon Valley. By their own account, it was sort of their destiny to come to California's tech hub. LaSota had a very strong scientific background, a computer science degree from the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and even had held an internship at NASA in 2013. In Berkeley, LaSota became involved with the local rationalist and effective altruist communities, or EA. These circles are known for somewhat wonky philosophy meetups and intense discussions about the future of humanity. They were fixated on the idea that artificial intelligence could soon reach superhuman intelligence. Many rationalists believed a misaligned super AI might even pose an existential threat to humanity if not properly controlled. Ziz shared this apocalyptic concern. They believed that AI could attain godlike power and could destroy humanity if left unchecked. This belief in a looming machine apocalypse became a cornerstone of the group's worldview. But Ziz's vision diverged from mainstream rationalist thought in some key ways. She was an anarchist and a passionate vegan, and she felt that her rationalist peers, quote, drastically undervalued non-human life, unquote. To Ziz, society was full of flesh-eating monsters for their exploitation of animals. Any future AI, she argued, must not only spare humanity, but also care for animals, a stance that put her at odds with human-centered AI risk theorists. This fusion of AI doomsday urgency with an animal rights and radical politics set the stage for what would become the Zizian ideology. Early on, Ziz also befriended others on the fringes of the rationalist scene. One key ally was Gwen Danielson, another trans woman in the Bay Area rationalist community. Danielson had developed an esoteric psychological theory. She believed every person harbors multiple sub-personalities or other identities within themselves, and she practiced techniques to awaken these internal personas. Together, Ziz and Danielson hatched an ambitious utopian plan in 2017, one that now reads like the origin story of a sci-fi cult. They decided to build a rationalist fleet, a flotilla of rehabilitated old ships that could serve as affordable co-living spaces for brilliant, like-minded young people. I'm starting to giggle here because all I can think of is like vegan Scientology, like vegan AI Scientology. I'm sorry. This story is not funny, but this piece of it is a little bit funny. Now, they wanted to be free from the high rents and the system of social politics. These gifted individuals would be liberated to focus on saving the world rather than making rent, while living in one of the most expensive cities in the entire country. Okay, great Great plan. It wasn't just a pipe dream. Along with a third party, Ziz and Danielson purchased a nearly 100-year-old tugboat, a rusty 94-foot vessel named the Caleb. The Caleb. The Caleb. That's their freedom ship name. The AI vegan trans death cult couldn't come up with a more creative name for their boat. So they were like, let's call it the Caleb. Guys, you couldn't chat GPT a little brainstorm. Couldn't let AI help you with the name a little bit. They sailed it from Alaska along the Pacific coast to the Bay Area and arrived around 2018. The Caleb became both a home and a symbol. It was a tangible representation of their idealistic project to live independent from the systems, on their own terms. For a while, the tugboat anchored in Half Moon Bay, about 30 miles south of San Francisco, and it was the closest thing to a headquarters for this nascent community. By 2018, Ziz had also deepened her involvement with rationalist institutions. She reportedly participated in an apprenticeship program co-run by the Center for Applied Rationality. My tongue is getting tied because the words of all the things they are called is so difficult to say. It does not run off the tongue. If you've seen that Parks and Rec episode where there's like this cult group that they're kind of making fun of Scientologists, they're called the Reasonableists, and they're calling themselves the Reasonableists on the Park and Recs episode so that they sound like a reasonable group, but what they believe is that there's like this, it's like a not dragon in the sky, a lizard in the sky, just like Scientology, that's going to come and like burn everyone's face off, and then the new world will be created. And that's how I feel like this is like the Center for Applied Rationality. It just is so much to say, and it sucks that a word like rational is being exploited, because it's like, I want everyone to be rational, but I don't want anyone to be a part of the Center for Applied Rationality. But they also were involved in the Machine Intelligence Research Institute. And these were actually nonprofits that were at the core of Berkeley's rationalists and AI safety scene. So meanwhile, Ziz maintained a prolific online presence. Under the handle Ziz, which was originally her internet nickname, which she embraced fully as her persona, LaSota authored a long-running blog titled Sinceriously. This blog, later described by observers as dark and sometimes violent in tone, was where Ziz articulated an increasingly strange and dense personal philosophy. She wrote about concepts like anti-ethics, dichotomy leakage, and timeless gambits. What is happening? My brain right now feels like it's getting tied into knots. Let me know if you're feeling like, what the heck are you talking about, Erin? Like, I'm so lost. I'm so confused. Me too, babe. Me too, babe. But we're going to be learning about the anti-ethics and the dichotomy leakage and the timeless gambits. So she divided people into moral categories like zombies versus vampires. It was basically shorthand for those she saw as unthinking followers versus malicious actors. In Ziz's lexicon, a single good person pursued one dimension of good, whereas a double good person balanced multiple virtues. Those writings hinted at an adversarial, even militant worldview taking shape. In one 2019 blog post titled Punching Evil, Ziz argued that if the state had been seized by vampires, her term for corrupt or evil forces, then there is no moral obligation not to perform self-defense. In other words, she suggested that violence could be justified as self-defense against a fundamentally evil or oppressive government. So if you think of like super, super, super far right evangelical doomsday preppers, this is kind of reminding me of like Lori Vallow and the cult that she and Chad Daybell had kind of created it. It's like the opposite, like the progressive version of that. This blurred the line between self-defense and preemptive aggression in some very troubling ways. And other posts of hers delved into her fascination with pop culture symbols like the Star Wars universe. Ziz jokingly, or perhaps seriously, referred to herself as a Sith. Sometimes cops harass me for wearing my religious attire as a Sith, she wrote, describing her penchant for donning black robes in public. As a Sith, I'm religiously required to do whatever I want. And for now, that so happens to include wearing black robes, she quipped. Guys, I don't care if you don't like it. I have to do it because it's my religion. Okay? I don't care what anyone thinks. It's my religion. It's totally fine to kill people because it's my religion and we have freedom of religion here. Okay? So, this mix of earnest ideology and tongue in cheek humor would characterize much of this group's culture. By late 2019, Ziz and her circle of friends were a familiar presence on the fringes of Bay Area rationalist meetups. They were those people, the outspoken anarchist vegans in gothic black attire who talked about AI gods and moral philosophy at house parties. They were so cool. Many in the rationalist mainstream found them odd or intense. CFR's director, Anna Solomon, later recalled Ziz as a young person who I suspect wanted to be important. Someone who pushed her ideas repeatedly and intensely without much success. Feeling sidelined and disillusioned, Ziz's little band of believers grew increasingly alienated from the larger community. They were idealists without an outlet, revolutionaries without a cause, until they found one in the most dramatic way. The moment that truly crystallized the Zizian cult, at least in the public eye, came on November 17th, 2019, at a wooded retreat center in Napa County, California. CFAR was holding its annual alumni workshop, a private gathering of rationalist thinkers. To Ziz and her friends, CFAR had become a symbol of everything wrong in the rationalist community: hypocrisy, tolerance of abuse, and complacency in the face of existential threats. So, deciding to take a stand, Ziz assembled a small crew for a direct action protest. On that day, Ziz, Gwen Danielson, Emma Borhanian, and another friend known as Somni, real name Alexander Leatham, arrived near the retreat in a pair of vehicles. They wore ominous black hooded robes and the iconic Guy Fawkes masks popularized by the film V for Vendetta, a look instantly evocative of hacktivist groups like Anonymous. Their plan was disruptive, but according to them, nonviolent. They intended to block the road leading into the retreat, preventing attendees from entering or leaving in order to draw attention to their grievances. Earlier that week, they had allegedly sent out flyers detailing their accusations against CFAR. The flyers claimed the center was covering up sex scandals, discriminating against trans women, and violating basic principles of friendliness, among other things. In short, Ziz's faction saw CFAR as betraying the very rationalist and ethical values it professed. As the four protesters parked their cars to blockade the retreat, they likely imagined themselves as righteous agitators delivering a wake-up call. But what happened next was far from the orderly demonstration they anticipated. Unbeknownst to the protesters, there were already participants, including children, inside the retreat compound. By sealing the entrances, the activists had inadvertently trapped people inside, which greatly escalated the alarm. Someone called the authorities, and soon police and a SWAT team arrived. The officers mistakenly believed the situation might involve armed individuals or even a potential shooter, given the strange outfits and the reports of people being prevented from leaving. So they moved in swiftly to neutralize that perceived threat. Amid the chaos, stun grenades exploded, and armed officers swarmed the area. The four protesters were forcibly subdued and arrested. Ziz and Danielson later alleged that they were manhandled and even assaulted while in custody. I will actually never be able to trust society, like trusting cops not to torture you for literally doing nothing wrong again, Ziz lamented afterward, describing the ordeal as deeply demoralizing. In the end, prosecutors initially hit the group with serious charges: felony false imprisonment and child endangerment due to the trapped children, though these were eventually reduced to misdemeanors. This dramatic confrontation, splashed in local news as an oddball story, effectively marks the founding of the Zizian group as an entity. The name Zizian itself caught on around this time, likely coined by outsiders as a label for the followers of Ziz. A pseudonymous warning website would later appear, painting Ziz as a dangerous cult leader who preyed on vulnerable trans people and indoctrinated them into her wacky ideology. Now, supporters of Ziz vigorously dispute this characterization, insisting that there was no formal cult hierarchy, just a network of friends with shared beliefs. It sounds really familiar, doesn't it? Yeah, it sounds like literally every other cult we've ever covered on this channel, ever. Nonetheless, from 2019 onward, the media and law enforcement would refer to the group as the Zizians. At the center of it all, the arrest solidified Jack Ziz LaSota's status as the group's figurehead. A mugshot of Ziz from that day in 2019 shows a young person with long blonde hair staring ahead with a mix of defiance and disorientation. It would not be the last mugshot bearing the name Ziz. The CFAR protest, while relatively minor legally, served as a galvanizing moment. The core members, now bonded by their shared arrest and sense of persecution, emerged even more radicalized than ever before. In their eyes, they had tried to speak truth to power and were met with force and injustice. This narrative of victimhood at the hands of authorities would fuel their subsequent actions. The Zizian group was never a large organization. It comprised perhaps a dozen or so individuals at its peak, with varying degrees of involvement. They really lacked a formal structure or written doctrine, yet a few key figures clearly drove the group's evolution. So below, we're going to profile the most prominent members and what is known about their roles within the group. So of course, we have to start with Ziz, the namesake of the cult and its de facto leader. LaSota is a 34-year-old transgender woman originally from Fairbanks, Alaska. Brilliant yet volatile, Ziz was the ideological engine of the group. She authored the Sinceriously blog espousing the group's core tenets: vegan anarchism, AI apocalypse urgency, and an almost messianic moral mission. Described as intensely ambitious and moralistic by those who knew her, Ziz has been variously portrayed as a charismatic guru or even a manipulative tyrant. CFAR staff recall her as an eager outsider who grew resentful when she couldn't gain influence. Within the group, Ziz was seen by followers as a visionary, willing to defy societal norms. Prosecutors very flatly call her the leader of an extremist group that is linked to multiple killings. Yeah, if you thought there weren't going to be murders, you were wrong. We're going to get to them. But remarkably, despite the violence associated with her followers, as of 2025, LaSota has not been formally charged with any of the murders, only with lesser offenses like trespassing and obstruction. But she is currently being jailed in Maryland, held without bail, because investigations are ongoing. And I know, we haven't even gotten to the biggest piece of this story. It's coming. I want you to feel the suspense. Do you feel it? Do you feel that suspense? Now, at the heart of the Zizian cult is a paradoxical ideology. It's a mix of profound moral idealism and an apparent willingness to use immoral means to achieve those ideals. Their core beliefs can be summarized along a few major themes. So, number one, we've talked about it a little bit: the imminent AI apocalypse. Zizians were convinced that advanced artificial intelligence poses an existential threat to life on Earth. Drawing from the rationalist community's warnings about AI, they believed that a super intelligent AI could destroy humanity if not properly controlled. However, unlike mainstream AI safety advocates, the Zizians did not put faith in established institutions or polite research conferences to assert this doom. They saw those avenues as too slow or corrupt. So instead, some hints suggest they felt direct action or even violence might be justified to reset society's course on AI. In their view, saving humanity and animal kind from a rogue AI was the ultimate mission, one that trumped conventional ethics. Ironically, while fearing a machine apocalypse, the group's own actions brought very human chaos and destruction. Number two, radical veganism and respect for all life. Unusual among cults, the Zizians' creed placed non human animals at the center of their moral universe. They were devout vegans, believing society's exploitation of animals was a towering injustice, so much that it imperiled any positive future. Ziz wrote that she lived among flesh eating monsters or meat eating humans. The group's writings and online posts frequently extolled animal life and condemned those who harmed animals. Maximilian Snyder's jailhouse letter to a prominent AI researcher imploring him to think of animals as people and give up meat captures just how central this belief was. Zizians believed any utopian future must include the liberation of animals, and they practiced what they preached. They maintained strictly vegan diets and often framed their fight as being on behalf of all sentient beings, not just humanity. Now, the third big belief is trans rights, gender liberation, and personal autonomy. Now, nearly every key member of the cult was transgender or non binary, and many had experienced marginalization in broader society, including, they felt, within the rationalist community. A major spark for the 2019 protest was the perception that the CFAR was discriminating against trans women. The Zizians embraced a deeply libertarian view of gender and identity. People should be free to define themselves. Ziz's own adoption of a new name and persona did exemplify this. They decreed gender oppression and supported one another through transitions. This ethos sometimes took on a combative edge, though. For example, Ziz was unapologetic about her unconventional appearance and bristled at any authority that tried to police her expression. Their writings accused society of enforcing a binary and patriarchal system that needed dismantling. The cult thus attracted trans individuals who felt disillusioned or unsafe in mainstream society, offering them a haven of acceptance, albeit one that came with its own dangers. And such a broad misrepresentation of trans people. Imagine preying on a group of individuals that are so marginalized and demonized, literally demonized by leaders in America, preying on these vulnerable individuals. And then, in essence, and I'm just using this terminology for lack of a better one, proving right the very leaders that are demonizing them. This is a misrepresentation of the trans experience, and that's not something I want to speak too much on because I'm not a trans person. But trans people just want to be accepted and loved. And if you're not trans, you're never going to understand the trans community, what it's like to be trans. And that's okay. And it should be okay. It should be okay for you to not understand something and let that thing happen anyways. Because at the end of the day, it does not affect you. But what makes me so angry about this group is they are making marginalized people who are constantly fighting for their right to live, and they are furthering the narrative that these people are bad and do bad things. And if they think that they're helping other people like them, they're not. They're not. They're making it worse for every other trans person who is living in this country. And it's so infuriating as an advocate for trans rights. I can't even imagine how trans individuals feel hearing about this story. There's no words. It's utterly aggravating. Sorry, had to go on a little bit of a rant there. We're back. Whew, we're back. Now, structurally, the Zizians were anarchists. They rejected formal hierarchy, ironically, in theory, because in practice, Ziz was at the center of this group, and they tried to live off of the grid and outside the law whenever possible. They saw the government and police as antagonists, a view that was reinforced after their harsh treatment during the 2019 protest. One member, Jamie Zajko, was described by law enforcement as adhering to an anti-law enforcement ideology. The group refused to cooperate with authorities at almost every turn. Ziz's blog explicitly glorified defying authority, suggesting that if the state is evil, anything done against it is justified. They referred to outsiders or unenlightened people as zombies, implying that most civilians were mindlessly complicit in a corrupt system. In contrast, the Zizians saw themselves as awakened revolutionaries in a war against a deeply flawed status quo. So, to bind all these threads together, the group has its own quasi-spiritual lexicon, much of it invented or popularized by Ziz. They spoke of good timelines and bad timelines, of dichotomy leakage and timeless decision theory. Much of this was arcane rationalist jargon repurposed to fit their own unique moral cause. But one intriguing aspect of it was the influence of Gwen Danielson's theory of plural personalities. Ziz and others adopted the idea that a person can have multiple internal personas or identities, sometimes called headmates. In one blog post, Ziz wrote about the two hemispheres of the brain having separate values and even genders, saying they often desire to kill each other, and that achieving peace between one's internal hemispheres requires careful psychological work. This almost mystic concept of grappling with one's inner selves set the Zizians apart from typical political extremists. It gave their movement a self-help or quasi-religious dimension, where introspection and personal transformation were as important as external activism. Some members engaged in exercises to awaken different facets of their personality, perhaps a reinterpretation of Danielson's techniques. It's as if they were attempting to cultivate an inner revolution in parallel with an outer one. But underscoring everything in this cult was a sense of urgent existential threat. Whether it was AI doom, climate collapse, or societal decay, the Zizians felt apocalypse was around the corner unless drastic measures were taken. And this kind of fed into their martyr complex. They saw themselves as heroes, willing to sacrifice normal life and eventually their freedom or even lives for the greater good. Quote, they get very moralistic about philosophy, unquote. This is what one acquaintance said of Ziz and the company. And indeed, the group's discourse was highly moralizing. They spoke in terms of ultimate good versus ultimate evil. When some members died, others framed it almost in martyrdom terms, as tragic casualties in a righteous fight. Now, unlike many cults, the Zizians didn't have a formal worship service or chants, at least none that are publicly known, but they did adopt certain rituals symbolically. They wore all black clothing from trench coats to robes. This was one of the observable practice, giving them a distinct presence wherever they settled. Once they moved to Chapel Hill, North Carolina, neighbors reported seeing similarly dressed figures walking around at night holding hands in total silence. How romantic. Now, this eerie image of robed devotees pacing wordlessly in the dark sounds almost like a ceremony or a group meditation. And it's unclear if this was an intentional ritual or just a communal habit, but it certainly added to their mystique. Additionally, their communal lifestyle with shared living quarters and pooled resources had a ritualistic aspect in the sense of renouncing all personal comforts for their mission. They often communicated in dense theoretical language, effectively creating an in group dialect that outsiders would struggle to decode. And this is a common cultic tactic that reinforces group cohesion. And of course, secrecy was sacrosanct. Members used aliases, encrypted communications, and isolated themselves from their families. The very act of fleeing normal society to live out of trucks and in boats and in remote hideouts was as much a practice as a necessity. It demonstrated commitment and it separated the truly faithful from the rest. So, in summary, the Zizian belief system took the familiar tropes of Silicon Valley futurism and social justice and then injected them with this revolutionary zeal. They wanted to save humanity from a rogue AI and also avenge the suffering of slaughtered animals. They championed the marginalized while openly advocating the downfall of existing authorities. It was a heady, volatile mix of idealism and fanaticism. And over time, it evolved from protest signs and blog posts to knives and guns. What triggered that shift was a series of events that convinced the Zizians that the war they'd predicted had begun for real. Now, understanding how the Zizians lived day to day helps illuminate how their beliefs translated into action. So rather than forming a single compound, the group was somewhat nomadic and improvised with living situations just like on the fly. Their journey took them from the deck of the Caleb tugboat to a scrappy trailer yard encampment and eventually onto the open road. For a time in 2018-2019, the tugboat Caleb was home base, docked at Pillar Point Harbor in Half Moon Bay. This ex-Navy vessel was both a living space and a statement. Life aboard was undoubtedly challenging. The century-old boat needed repairs, space was cramped, and the bay's damp chill crept through the hull. But for Ziz Danielson and their crew, the Caleb embodied freedom from landlords and conformity. They likely held late night discussions on its deck about strategy and philosophy. Oh, they're so cool and different from the rest of us. By mid 2020, however, the realities of boat life and Ziz's legal troubles from the protest made them seek shore. They found refuge through a fellow live aboard boater named Curtis Lind. Lind owned a plot of land in Vallejo, a city in the North Bay where he stored trailers and vehicles. He had befriended Ziz's circle at the harbor, even helping one member shop for her first bra, and he later recalled this as evidence of his goodwill. Or could it be evidence that you're a creeper? Maybe. Seeing that the tugboat was proving unsustainable, Lind agreed to let some of the crew move onto his property in Vallejo. By late 2020 or so, a group of the Zizians relocated to Lind's trailer yard, bringing with them a couple of old RVs and box trucks to convert into living quarters. Among those who settled there were Emma Borhanian, Suri Dow, and Somni Leatham. It's unclear if Ziz herself lived on site full time or moved in and out because she did keep another small sailboat, the Black Signet, elsewhere, but she was closely involved with the commune's affairs. For a while, the arrangement was mutually agreeable. The Zizians finally had a piece of land, however humble, where they could park their vehicles and live according to their values. They presumably set up a vegan collective, sharing meals of plant-based food, possibly growing vegetables or foraging, and definitely not allowing any animal products on the premises. They had electricity and relative privacy. The group likely treated the site as a mini autonomous zone. Pets and wildlife may have been cared for tenderly. One can imagine feral cats in the yard becoming beloved cult mascots because Zizians were such animal lovers. But when the COVID-19 pandemic hit in 2020, the group took advantage of California's eviction moratorium, pointedly stopping any rent payments to Lind. Legally, Lind couldn't evict them during the emergency, and the Zizians, who already felt rent was an unjust tax, were happy to live rent-free. Just remind you that this is a guy doing them a favor. He's like, hey, you might drown if you stay in this tugboat. Why don't you come move up onto dry land? And they're like, great. I'm not paying rent. What? So this sowed the seeds of conflict with Lind, but for a time, he tolerated it. He described the atmosphere as awkward but civil during that period. And inside the group, finances were always tight. Most members didn't hold regular jobs by then. They were full-time revolutionaries, scraping by on savings or gig work. The Vallejo commune likely pooled resources in a quasi-communist fashion. They may have even dumpster dived for food or relied on sympathetic friends for supplies. That's what we call freegans. I think they're all misidentifying themselves. Now, what little money they had might go towards gas for the generator, internet access, and their legal defense funds. By mid 2022, stress was mounting. Lind was losing patience as the state prepared to lift eviction protections. So he didn't get rent for like 2 years. And the group's internal cohesion was starting to be tested. It was around this time that Ziz did something dramatic. She faked her own death. In August 2022, LaSota's sister and Emma Borhanian told authorities that LaSota had fallen off her boat and drowned in the bay. An obituary even ran in Ziz's hometown newspaper in Fairbanks, Alaska, mourning her as a free-spirited adventurer lost at sea. Now, this was a calculated ploy, perhaps to let Ziz evade the intensifying legal and interpersonal troubles. While dead on paper, she could go underground. And indeed, no body was ever found. And a few months later, Ziz would turn up very much alive in the thick of further turmoil. At the time, her followers acted as if she was gone, which must have added to their emotional strain. By the fall of 2022, the Vallejo commune was fraught with tension. Curtis Lind, no longer restrained by eviction bans, wanted his tenants either to pay up or leave. The Zizians, for their part, resented Lind's pressure and likely saw him as yet another oppressor interfering with their autonomous zone. According to one later account, Lind had threatened to evict or harm them, and at least one cult member allegedly threatened him with a knife in return. So, fearing for his life, Lind legally obtained a court eviction order and also armed himself with a handgun for protection. Now, all of this came to a head on November 13th, 2022. The precise sequence of events that day remains disputed, but what is known is that a violent confrontation erupted between Lind and the Zizians on the property. Lind later alleged that he was lured into a vulnerable position. He was asked to bend down to shut off a water valve and was then attacked with a samurai sword by one of the tenants. He was stabbed in the chest, though not immediately killed. At that point, Lind drew his firearm and began shooting wildly in self-defense, and multiple people were hit by gunfire. Now, when the smoke cleared, Emma Borhanian lay dead, shot by Lind. Alexander Leatham was gravely wounded, and Lind himself was bleeding heavily from the sword wound. Now, investigators faced a murky situation. Who was the aggressor and who was the victim? Lind insisted that he acted only in self-defense after a tenant ambushed him with a sword. Some in the Zizian circle claimed that Lind had provoked them or even that he had attacked first. But ultimately, Solano County prosecutors sided with Lind's account. They declined to charge Lind, accepting that he fired his weapon to save his life, and instead made the stunning move of charging Suri Do Dio and Somni, or Alexander Leatham, with murder. Not for killing Lind, who survived, but for the death of their friend Emma. The legal theory was that by allegedly initiating a violent felony by assaulting Lind, the Zizians were responsible for any resulting death, even that of an accomplice under California's felony murder rule. This decision enraged and further radicalized the remaining Zizians. From their perspective, they were the ones wronged. Emma had been shot dead by Lind, yet now two of their own were being scapegoated for her death. So feeling unjustly persecuted once again, some members apparently concluded that conventional justice was futile. And indeed, as Dio and Leatham sat behind bars awaiting trial in late 2022, other Zizians began plotting on the outside. Now, it's around this time that Ziz re-emerged from the shadows. Officially, the world still thought Ziz was dead due to that fake boating accident, but she was very much alive and moving behind the scenes. The end of 2022 brought a disturbing new case that, while not definitively solved, appears intimately tied to the Zizian story: the execution-style murder of the Zajko family in Pennsylvania. On December 31st, 2022, Richard and Rita Zazko, an elderly couple in an affluent suburb of Philadelphia, invited two visitors into their home, and soon neighbors heard some shouting. Less than 20 minutes later, the visitors were gone and the house fell silent. But days passed. On January 2nd, 2023, police conducting a welfare check found a gruesome scene. Richard and Rita had been shot dead, each with a bullet to the head. There were no signs of forced entry, and suspicion soon focused on someone who knew them well: their 32-year-old daughter, Michelle, or Jamie Zazko. Jamie Zazko's connection to the Zizians now came under scrutiny. She had lived in the Bay Area and appears to have known Ziz for years. In fact, Jamie might have been drifting toward the cult's orbit. A Tumblr post that has been attributed to her from early 2022 even accused Ziz of threatening to kill her unless Jamie killed someone else. So this is a chilling glimpse into possible coercion within the group. That allegation has been unverified, but it does show Jamie's entanglement with Ziz's violent ideation. Moreover, Jamie owned a handgun that matched the caliber used in her parents' murder. And as an only child, she stood to inherit her parents' substantial estate, which could obviously be a motive. So with Jamie named a person of interest in the double homicide, Pennsylvania authorities tracked her down within days. And on January 11th, 2023, they found Jamie at a hotel in Chester, Pennsylvania. And that wasn't all. As officers moved in to detain her, Jamie shouted urgently for someone in an adjacent room, effectively tipping off accomplices next door. Police returned the next day with a warrant for the other hotel room. And inside, they found Daniel Blank and none other than Ziz herself. In a scene dripping with drama, Ziz went limp, pretending to be unconscious or dead, forcing officers to carry her out. And all three, Jamie, Daniel, and Ziz, were arrested on the spot. However, notably, they were charged only with relatively minor offenses: obstruction, resisting arrest, and trespassing, since evidence tying them to those murders was still considered circumstantial. Ziz spent 5 months in a Pennsylvania jail on the obstruction charge before friends pooled money for her bail. By mid-2023, she was released and immediately vanished. Jamie Zazko likewise posted bail and disappeared, as did Daniel Blank. So Ziz, Jamie, and Blank all became fugitives, likely sticking together and laying low as a trio. From this point forward, they would live off the grid, moving stealthily across state lines and evading a growing federal dragnet. So, just to tie this all together, okay, they try to kill their landlord. They instead get charged with murdering their friend. So they decide to flee to Pennsylvania because they think, hey, we need to get out of here. We need to lay low. What should we do? Let's kill one of our parents and get some inheritance money that'll help us survive while we're on the run. Great plan. And this is, again, all for the greater good of humanity. So it's totally fine if you kill your parents because you're going to fight AI and save all the animals, but kill the humans that stand in your way who brought you into this earth, who love you. Okay, awesome. I'm just trying to just give us all a second to take it all in. So, for much of 2024, the Zizians dropped off the public radar. Gwen Danielson, remember her? She'd basically ghosted away into obscurity. Deo and Lethem languished in jail awaiting trial. Ziz and her two compatriots were in hiding. But beyond the spotlight, new recruits were still being radicalized online. Yes, because they were still posting online. So it was during this period that people like Maximilian Adair Snyder and Teresa Milo Youngblood, who had followed Ziz's blog from afar, started to become increasingly involved. Snyder, in particular, seemed totally galvanized by the Vallejo situation. He was in touch with Ziz's allies and even attempted to raise funds for her legal defense. The circle of committed Zizians now extended to the East Coast and abroad, including Ophelia Buckholt in New York, for example. And then, in January of this year, 2025, the powder keg exploded. A rapid sequence of violent events across the country finally exposed the Zizians to the world. So on January 17th, 2025, in Vallejo, California, on a very foggy morning, 82-year-old Curtis Lind sat in his truck outside the courthouse, preparing to testify in the upcoming trial against Deo and Lethem, the case concerning Emma's death, where he was almost killed and he shot Emma in self-defense. But before he could enter, a masked assailant lunged at him and stabbed him repeatedly and then fled the scene. Lind bled to death. And within hours, police arrested Maximilian Snyder, who was only 22 years old, as a suspected killer. Snyder was an Oxford-educated AI researcher and seemed like an unlikely murderer, but acquaintances confirmed that he was steeped in Zizian ideology. The theory is that Snyder assassinated Lind to silence him and avenge Emma's death, essentially taking justice into the cult's own hands. Now, Snyder has declined to comment on the specifics, neither confirming nor denying that he was Lind's killer. Now, 3 days later, and 3,000 miles away, a routine traffic stop turned into a deadly shootout. U.S. Border Patrol agents pulled over a Toyota Prius with out-of-state license plate. Inside were Teresa Milo Youngblood, 23, and Ophelia Felix Bockholt, 25. Two names that had not been publicly linked to the Zizians until that very moment, along with an unidentified driver. And it was later revealed that the driver was using a fake identity, but evidence suggests that it was Milo's fiancé, Maximilian Snyder, who had rushed across the country after Lynn's murder. However, Snyder had also been arrested, so more likely the driver was another sympathizer or someone who was trying to fill Snyder's role. It was just a kerfuffle. It was confusing. And some reports indicated that Snyder and Youngblood had applied for a marriage license, hinting at their very close partnership. So obviously, this case is still kind of new, so things are still being pieced together. Now, as an agent approached the Prius, Youngblood, dressed in, you guessed it, black tactical gear, allegedly sprang out and opened fire without warning. So, caught off guard, the officers returned fire. And in the ensuing fight on the snowy highway, Border Patrol agent David Malland was shot and killed. Ophelia, the tech prodigy in the passenger seat, was also fatally hit. Youngblood was wounded and arrested on the spot, somehow miraculously surviving the encounter. Authorities soon connected Youngblood and Buckholt to the Zizian network. They'd been under periodic FBI surveillance since a hotel clerk in North Carolina reported them for suspicious behavior. They had been wearing body armor and moving around firearms just a week earlier. And their Prius was apparently en route to rendezvous with Ziz, perhaps to attempt an escape into Canada, a plan that was dramatically derailed by this shootout. This just goes to show that cults can grow on the internet. And I'm so tired of hearing like, oh, well, they don't have a commune. They don't meet in person. There's no way it's really a cult. Yes, it is. We have this cult that moves from California to Pennsylvania because they're essentially on the run. Okay. And then we have them targeting their supposed enemy back in California while they're laying low but consistently posting online on this blog. And people are reading this blog and they're basically having a call to action to take these violent extremes to further their purpose and their ideology. It's absolutely horrifying. People are able to mobilize because of social media. That is the primary source of information now. So if you have a fringe group who is consistently posting on social media and someone is just curious about it, the algorithm is going to pick up that information, that content, and start pushing it out to everyone else in the whole nation, the world, that might be interested in that information. And so while I understand that this case is really confusing because it's like there's murders happening in California, Pennsylvania, somehow someone's in North Carolina, now we've got someone in New York, it is because they were mobilizing remotely and giving directives to people who were in different areas. That is how it can happen. This is a prime example of an online cult starting to grow, amassing a following, and starting to mobilize literally on the ground and have these weapons. It's like if Waco had just little couples of people who believed all that ideology, and instead of living in one compound, they just were given a date and time and an action to take, and they took it without question. Just like what happened at Waco, where they stored tons and tons and tons of weapons and essentially went to war with the government. It was like a total massacre. That's what's happening here. So if you've been confused on like, okay, we jumped from California to Pennsylvania to North Carolina and New York, it's because people are seeing the content online and getting attached to the creator of that content and deciding to listen to whatever that person says. It just goes to show that just because somebody speaks with conviction and confidently doesn't mean they're not bullied. Maybe even I'm bullied sometimes. I do my research and I'm very honest as a human, but I get it wrong too. And I'm not trying to push any beliefs onto anybody, but just be cautious. Question me, question everyone, question everything. So, to continue, sorry for that tangent. I just wanted to make sure we were all on the same page. These two incidents, the Lind assassination in California and the Border Patrol shootout in Vermont, put federal authorities across the nation on high alert. For the first time, the name Zizian began appearing in national headlines as law enforcement realized they were dealing with a coordinated cross-country extremist group. The FBI, ATF, and state police formed a joint task force, which literally never happens, and the priority was to target Ziz, who was still at large, presumably accompanied by Jamie and Daniel, who had killed those two sweet senior citizens in Pennsylvania. And it didn't take long to smoke them out. Luckily, on February 17th, 2025, in the rural outskirts of Frostburg, Maryland, a property owner noticed something strange on his land. Two large white box trucks parked in the woods. When he approached, three people, two women and a man, emerged and politely asked if they could camp on his property for a month. Sensing that something was kind of off because the trio looked disheveled, fearful, and the trucks were conspicuous, the landowner luckily decided to call the police. And Maryland state troopers arrived, finding the suspects very uncooperative and armed. One woman was even crying and begging officers not to kill her, and none of them would give their real name. But ultimately, fingerprints and FBI provided photos confirmed their identities. Ziz, Jamie, and Daniel were finally caught and cornered. The three were arrested on a litany of minor local charges: trespassing, obstructing police, weapon possession, as well as for their outstanding warrants elsewhere. Ziz's run was over. Tellingly, during booking, she refused to open her eyes for the mugshot. It's just eerie. Now, after 2 years as a phantom, declared dead, and then wanted in 2 states, Ziz was now in custody, facing the real prospect of spending the rest of her life behind bars. With that Maryland arrest, essentially the entire known Zizian network was rounded up. Over a dozen total people had been ensnared. Ziz and Danielson in hiding, Borhanian unfortunately deceased, Lethem, Deo, Zazko, Blank, Snyder, Youngblood, and Bachholt, also unfortunately deceased. And then there were a few other fringe players that are not publicly identified. The group's crime spree spanned 6 deaths in 3 states. The murder of Emma Borhanian, for which Deo and Lethem were charged, and the revenge killing of Curtis Lind, allegedly by Snyder. And then, of course, the double homicide of the Zazkos, which was allegedly conducted by their daughter Jamie. And, of course, the Vermont shootout killing Agent Meland and Ophelia Bachholt. It was a trail of carnage that left investigators and the public reeling at how a bunch of idealistic 20-somethings had transformed into a band of killers. As an Associated Press report put it, they set out to save humanity from a rogue AI and ended up leaving a trail of bodies. The big question many asked was, how could this happen here? In the progressive, tech-savvy Bay Area, right under people's noses? And to answer that question, one must consider the broader cultural and regional context that shaped the Zizians. The San Francisco Bay Area has long been a fertile ground for countercultural movements, from the hippies of the 1960s to the Black Panthers and anti-war radicals of the 70s to the punk anarchists and cyber libertarians of later decades. It's also a region that has spawned its share of cults and fringe groups. The 1970s saw Jim Jones, the People's Temple in San Francisco, long before the tragic Jonestown Massacre, and the Symbionese Liberation Army's bizarre revolution that kidnapped Patty Hearst in Berkeley. Silicon Valley in the 21st century brought us techno-spiritual movements like effective altruism and fringe self-help cults. In many ways, the Zizian cult is a product of this unique Bay Area milieu, a blend of utopian idealism, anti-authoritarian streaks, and eccentric personalities colliding in a high-pressure social environment. One surprising cultural touchstone often mentioned in tandem with the Zizians is the legacy of Mac Dre, the iconic Bay Area rapper from Vallejo. At first glance, a 1990s hip-hop legend and a 2020s rationalist cult might seem to share little beyond geographic region, but the connection lies in the Bay Area's penchant for cultivating folk heroes and a cult of personality around rebels who defy the mainstream. Mac Dre, or Andre Hicks, was a Vallejo-born rapper who became an underground legend and the godfather of the Bay's hyphy movement. Known for his irreverent style, wild persona, and independent hustle, Mac Dre embodied unapologetic self-expression and regional pride. Even after his untimely death in 2004, he was gunned down in a still unsolved homicide. The spirit of Mac Dre loomed large over Bay Area culture. 15 years later, in 2019, thousands gathered at an Oakland concert to celebrate what would have been his birthday, with an all-star lineup paying homage. As one music journalist noted, the spirit of Mac Dre remains a strong undercurrent in the Bay Area rap scene. Locally, Mac Dre achieved a cult-like following himself. Fans idolized him and imitated his slang and his dance moves. And they treated him as a countercultural saint. An entertainment magazine marveled at the level to which Bay Area rap fans would worship Mac Dre because it seemed to befuddle cultural outsiders. So why does this matter? Because the Zizian saga unfolded in the very same communities, literally in Vallejo, where Mac Dre's legend lives. Vallejo is a working-class port city, has a history of economic struggle, creativity, and defiance. It birthed Mac Dre's Romper Room Gang, which is a group of friends, some whom dabbled in bank robbery and landed Dre in prison in the 90s. And later, the hyphy cultural explosion, which was all about rejecting social decorum and getting stupid, all as an act of freedom. The Zizians, with their rental trucks and black robes, were outsiders in Vallejo, but they tapped into that same local vein of rebellious energy. It is telling that Channel 5 journalist Andrew Callahan titled his recent deep dive video on this story, The Zizian Cult and Spirit of Mac Dre. The juxtaposition suggests that to understand the Zizians, one must also understand the Bay Area's unique cocktail of radical tech culture and street culture. In a sense, the Zizians and Mac Dre represent two sides of Bay Area rebellion. Mac Dre symbolized joyful, anarchic. Mac Dre symbolized joyful, anarchic celebration, turning hardships into music and dance, thumbing his nose at authority, be it law enforcement or the music industry itself. But in a way, that brought people together. But Ziz and her followers, by contrast, took this darker path, one of apocalyptic urgency and moral absolutism, which tore communities apart. Yet both arose from a distrust of conventional pathways and a desire to create something new on their own terms. Some observers even draw parallels in the way both built a mythos. Mac Dre had alter egos like Thizel Washington and shared wild tales of daring and martyr like status after death. And Ziz too cultivated an enigmatic persona, complete with online monikers, philosophical manifestos, and even staging her own death to add to her legend. Both amassed devoted followers in their respective spheres, Mac Dre in music, Ziz in fringe philosophy, and both had a language of their own, Dre's slang versus Ziz's jargon or whatever you want to call it. And of course, it's crucial to note that Mac Dre was not connected to the Zizians in any direct way. Dre's cult was one of fandom and culture, not violence or coercion. If anything, the spirit of Mac Dre serves as a counterpoint, a reminder that counterculture doesn't have to be destructive. Vallejo locals will proudly tell you about Mac Dre's positive impact, giving a voice to the voiceless, uniting people with music. By contrast, the Zizian cult turned inward and became predatory, ultimately earning infamy rather than admiration. Yet the cultural soil that grew both phenomena is the same. The Bay Area encourages people to challenge norms. Sometimes that yields beautiful art and social progress. Other times it yields instability and extremism. The Zizians borrowed imagery from pop and tech subcultures, those anonymous masks, sci-fi tropes, hacker aesthetics, etc., and values from activist subcultures like veganism, queer liberation, and anti-capitalism. So in another world, they might have been just another Bay Area social experiment, like a vegan co-op or a Burning Man camp project. Indeed, just across the bay in Oakland, there are likely warehouses full of young idealists living unconventional lives, but not committing crimes. What pushed the Zizians over the edge was a combination of their apocalyptic narrative and a series of escalating confrontations with the law that hardened their us versus them mentality. It's also instructive to see how Bay Area media treated the Zizians. Outlets like the San Francisco Chronicle and SF Gate tracked the story as it related to local tech culture and crime. There was this sense of local shame and shock. I mean, this wasn't a cult imported from somewhere else. These were our people, educated in our pristine universities, living in our own neighborhoods. And meanwhile, national outlets at times played up the more sensational aspects, like the transgender vegan cult angle, as Fox News bluntly put it. And this does feed into culture war tropes. But it also speaks to us as humans. Why are we more likely to click on that video than another one? The thing that's unfortunate, because I haven't decided what the title for this video will be at the time of recording it, but it might be something like transgender vegan death cult. And as much as I don't want to play into any like culture war narrative, I also, that's how you get views. And I know that sounds so terrible, but it makes me wonder, what is it about us as a society that we want to click on that video over one titled something less inflammatory? And I don't even want to be compared to Fox News ever in my life, so maybe I won't use that as a title. I've got a lot of thinking to do, guys. This is really like touching a moral nerve in my heart because I want to get the story out there, but I don't want to add any fuel to the fire of human beings who identify a certain way and are put in danger. You know what I mean? That's something I'm going to have to deal with when I have my nightly anxiety spiral, but that's neither here nor there. In short, the Zizians can be seen as an outgrowth of the Bay's long tradition of radical experimentation. They combine the region's cutting-edge futurism, AI risk, tech dreams, with its legacy of protest and anarchism, but it lacked the grounding influences of pragmatism and empathy that have guided many successful movements there. If MacDre's spirit exemplifies the playful side of rebellion, Ziz's legacy exemplifies the perilous extreme. The Bay Area gave rise to both, one a folk hero, the other a cautionary tale. With the principal members of the Zizian cult now in custody or even deceased, the saga enters its final phase, the slow churn of the justice system and the public reckoning of what has transpired. As of this video, here's the current status of the key figures and the legal cases. Ziz is incarcerated in Maryland and held without bail. She faces weapons and obstruction charges, but more significantly is also wanted in California and Pennsylvania for skipping court dates related to the 2019 protest and the 2023 hotel incident. Federal and state authorities are still investigating her connection to the murders. Notably, she has not been formally charged in any of the homicides as of yet. And I believe she was also on like a hunger strike if she didn't get vegan food. I do want to note that the FBI is reportedly building a case that could include conspiracy or even terrorism charges if evidence links her to orchestrating any of this violence. But for now, she's something of an enigma, the self-styled cult leader behind bars maintaining silence. But one detail, during a February hearing, Ziz allegedly kept her eyes closed and refused to acknowledge the court, signaling a continued non-cooperation stance. Mental evaluations and competency could become an issue in her case because of this odd behavior. Now, Michelle Jamie Zazko is in custody in Maryland alongside Ziz. She is considered a person of interest, if not the outright suspect, in her parents' double homicide. Pennsylvania authorities have frozen her estate inheritance pending the outcome of this whole situation. Jamie is facing local charges in Maryland and is likely to be extradited to Pennsylvania to face questioning or charges in the murder case. She denies any involvement in her parents' death, but her fate is tied closely to Ziz's. If one flips on the other, their stories and culpability could shift. The third arrestee in Maryland is Daniel Blank, and he faces the least notoriety but still faces serious trouble. This 26-year-old is essentially a devotee who followed Ziz to the end. He's charged in Maryland with trespass and obstruction of justice and could face additional charges as investigators comb through evidence, perhaps like aiding an interstate flight, etc. And Blake's best hope may be cooperation, like providing intelligence on the group to avoid a harsher punishment, but it's unclear if he will be inclined to talk. Gwen Danielson's status is somewhat ambiguous. She's not implicated in the later crimes and reportedly went totally off the grid. Law enforcement have expressed interest in interviewing her as a witness, but she has not come forward. According to her family, she is hiding out of fear. She could be subpoenaed if she's found, but as of right now, she remains a missing piece of the puzzle. The once lieutenant of Ziz, who might shed light on some of those cult dynamics. Now, Alex Somni Leatham and Suri Dow both remain in jail in California awaiting trial for the murder of Emma Borhanian. Their trial has been delayed due to the twists in this case and possibly the capture of Ziz. The evidence was largely hinging on Lynn's testimony and forensic details of the sword attack. But with him now deceased, the prosecution must rely on his prior statements and other evidence. But ironically, Snyder's killing of Lynn in 2025 potentially complicates the case against Leatham and Deo. Their attorney could argue that they can't cross-examine the primary witness, so it's this weird legal tangle. Prosecutors, however, argued that Lynn's death doesn't exonerate the tenants, and they're prepared to proceed. Both defendants have pleaded not guilty. Now, Max Adair Snyder is jailed in California on first-degree murder charges for Curtis Lynn's slaying. He's become something of a media curiosity. He's this young Ivy League graduate turned accused killer. In a jailhouse interview with the SF Chronicle, Snyder remained evasive about specifics, instead using the platform to espouse Zizian beliefs. He literally dictated an open letter to famed AI researcher Eliezer Yudkowsky, urging him to adopt veganism. This is what I mean when some vegans are unhinged. And this did little to help his legal case, but it did provide insight into his mindset. His trial is still pending, given the strong evidence. Reportedly, he was caught near the scene with a weapon, and he still does face a steep legal battle. Now we have Teresa Milo Youngblood. They're in federal custody in Vermont, charged with the murder of Border Patrol agent David Maland, among other federal charges like attempted murder of other agents and weapons violations. Their case will likely be handled in federal court, and they could face the death penalty since the victim was a federal agent killed in the line of duty. Their lawyers may mount an insanity or diminished capacity defense, citing the cult's influence. Youngblood has been uncommunicative so far, but this case as a whole is likely to draw national attention soon, given its rarity. I mean, this is a violent attack, a violent government attack, no less, by a self-professed anarchist group full of trans people. So, I mean, I kind of hope mainstream media doesn't start picking it up and touting anti-trans rhetoric, but I guess it's so aggravating. It is so aggravating. And let's not end this video without recognizing the victims in all of this, some of which were victims and perpetrators. We have Ophelia Buckholt, who is tragically dead. Her promising life was cut short in the border shootout. She was also a member of that cult. And of course, we can't forget Emma Borhanian, who is remembered by friends as just a kind soul who was led astray. And of course, we have Curtis Lind, who is mourned by his family. He was a Navy veteran and by all accounts had tried to help the Zizians, only to end up entangled fatally. And of course, we have Border Agent Maland, who received a hero's funeral and posthumous honor. Legally, the story is unfolding in several courtrooms across the nation, but in the court of public opinion, the Zizian cult has already become a topic of intense debate. Cult experts and psychologists are weighing in on whether the Zizians truly constitute a cult in the traditional sense, because some argue that despite the sensational label, the group lacked a formal religion or coherent theology beyond one charismatic leader's personal ideology. So perhaps they're better described as a small cell of extremists or a terroristic anarchist group. I don't think you need to have a religion base to be called a cult, personally, because there are some classic cult-like patterns. There's a leader with influence. There are members becoming isolated from family. There's the use of this unique jargon and moral absolutism. And even the staged fake death echoes cultic grandiosity. But when we really reflect about the Zizian cult, and I'm going to call it a cult because I believe it is a cult, terrible things happened because someone was pushing out certain ideology. You have to kind of unpack and reflect on what caused all this, because it truly is an example of what bad things can happen when there's this intersection of modern anxieties. We have technological doom, identity, idealism, and even disillusionment. It's a story how a tight-knit community can slide into groupthink and paranoia, especially under pressure from external conflict. It's also a tragic narrative of youth totally derailed. These were highly intelligent people who sincerely believed they were on some noble path, and this all somehow justified horrific acts to them. The cognitive dissonance is jarring. A manifesto about compassion for all beings in one hand and a literal smoking gun in another. And finally, this is a story that forces us to examine the very real line between activism and extremism. The Bay Area has no shortage of activists chaining themselves to fences or protesting perceived injustices. It's just part of the fabric of being in a democratic society. But when does a passionate cause cross over into a dangerous cult? Perhaps one line is drawn here, where openness ends and secretive, dogmatic insularity begins. The Zizians operated in increasing secrecy, shunning anyone outside their bubble of beliefs. Another line is crossed when a group sees violence as justified to achieve its aims, a point the Zizians appear to have reached when they took up swords and guns. In the end, the Zizian cult's rise and fall reads like a fictional thriller, too bizarre to be real. Transgender vegan anarchists plotting to stop a machine apocalypse, leaving a trail of murder from coast to coast. But it did happen, and it happened in our time. Perhaps a sign of the unique pressures and fragmentations of the 2020s. As the trials unfold, more truth will come out, and perhaps, hopefully, some remorse. But until then, the tale stands as a stark reminder that idealism, unchecked by humility, can become its own form of tyranny. The spirit of Mac Dre lives on in the Bay Area as this positive rallying cry. But the legacy of Ziz will likely serve as a warning that even in a land of freedom and innovation, cultish extremism can take root and flourish in the shadows, with consequences as tragic as any in California's long history of radical movements. In a time of echo chambers and digital tribes, the Zizian story forces us to ask, what happens when the pursuit of good becomes so absolute it justifies anything? When passion outpaces accountability, and when intellect loses touch with empathy. The Zizians weren't born monsters. They were thinkers, seekers, survivors. But their story is a reminder that no amount of brilliance can replace humility. No moral cause is worth losing our humanity. Ideals can elevate, but unchecked, they can also destroy. We should listen, learn, and remember. This was probably my longest video yet. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for being with me today. And please let me know if you like really long videos like this. Hopefully it gives you something to listen to if you're on a road trip or standing in the security line at the airport or whatever you're doing today. Hope it's getting you past the day. My heart goes out to all the victims in this case and their families. It's so sad that there were so many good people that were literally caught in the crossfires of this dangerous group. And this is what can happen when there's no accountability, when we don't take online cults seriously. So please have a great rest of your week. Stay safe out there, ask questions, and remember to always stay skeptical. I'll see you in my next video very soon. Thank you all so much. Bye.